So today we're going to talk about the 16VU. As much as it may look similar to the 16T, it's a very different beast. If we think of the 16T as the aggressive member of the family, the brute, the 16VU is probably the much classier and refined brother. It's a softer sounding compressor, it's a little bit slower, but it's very, very musical. Lends itself to bottom end information as well as top end information. So we'll see, you know, the two main uses I've got it in this mix for. So starting on the overheads, again with this I want something. My pet hate is hearing a drum kit sound that's got all the close mics and then no cymbals, none of that up there. You know, it's the same as having a guitar pickup that's only working on 3 strings instead of 6 strings. You're not hearing the whole chord. You know, a drum kit is a whole instrument. We want to hear every element of the drums. So the overheads are a huge important part of that. So my kind of approach for drums is I want to hear every element of the drum kit at the same volume. So no matter where the player is on the kit, I want that nice forward drum sound. So the 16VU is great for me for kind of reining in the cymbals, but in a really soft way that I'm not having to go over the top. So we'll hear in a minute how I'm treating my overheads in the sense that it's ever so slightly just starting to dig in and pulling off the transient of the kick drum, and then just kind of pulling my cymbals down, but again in a really musical way that doesn't pump. So we'll just listen to one of the overheads at the moment. So without the compressor, again we've got that nice, you know, we've got the front end of the snare drum, but because in this rock mix I've got a really forward snare drum sound anyway, I want to be in control of that, so I don't really want the snare coming in from anywhere else. So if we put the compressor in, again, it's hardly doing anything. You can just see that we're just touching the threshold, and you can only just see it's kind of going to gain reduction there, but audibly you can hear it's just taking that front end off the snare drum. And then when he hits a cymbal, we can just see it's just digging in, maybe 3 or 4 dB gain reduction, but we don't have the separate knee control on this. It's a fixed knee compressor, but again, it's just overall a much kind of softer, more musical compressor. So it's just nicely holding those cymbals where I want them, which then with the slightest little bit of makeup gain, I can then just get my cymbals nice and forward in the mix. So I've actually got it on a subgroup as well. I've got everything on the top of the drum kit, the hats and the ride and the overheads going into a subgroup. The hats and the ride, I'm using different compression on those because obviously there's a lot more close-up transient information in those, so I want to be able to shape the attack control on that a little bit more. So ignoring the compression I've got on those, all of them then are going into one subgroup, which again, really subtle. I've actually got the compression, the ratio dialed right up on this, but it's not smashing it in any way because I've still got the threshold set quite high. You'll see if we're just listening to the overhead subgroup, there's not a huge amount of compression, but it's just, again, just starting to pump a little bit, but it's keeping everything really forward for me. If we're listening to it without the compressor, it's obviously still quite compressed sounding because the individual channels have been compressed. But again, going back to that thing of what we said where we want the whole drum kit to sound like one instrument, just for me, just putting this in just starts to glue everything together. So I can keep those hi-hats nice and forward, nice and present, but they're not going to overtake the cymbals. And then when I put that in with the drum sound, you can hear that I've got all of those cymbals, I've got the hats, the ride, the crashes, everything really forward, so I can hear wherever he is on the kit, I can hear him really up front, but at no point is a cymbal taking your head off. They're exactly where I want them in the mix, and the 16VU is perfect for that, just ever so slight pin compression, just holding things where I want them. So moving away from that, the other place I love this compressor is bass. In the other video that we've done about the 16T, you'll see that I'm using it on the bass pre. Now with this, the bass pre is a very clean, kind of hard played feed, whereas the bass post has got a nice distortion on it, which obviously distortion's already kind of round off that front end for me, so it's a much softer sound anyway. So you can see on this we've got quite a lot of gain reduction. Again, a high ratio, you know, we're into nearly 10 dB of gain reduction, and we're constantly in compression really. So this is what I like to do, because I want, without it, again, we start to get more articulation from the strings, but if we go back to what bass pre's doing, I've got all that anyway, so I'm using that kind of clean feed to get the note, to get the articulation of what he's playing across. So what I want from this post feed is this really nice, lengthened, kind of solid bottom end. So again, with what we said, going back to the overheads, I love this compressor for just holding things. It doesn't pump too much, it's not too aggressive, it just holds things in place. So as soon as we put this guy in, you can see we just start to lose that front end information and that kind of, the initial fizz on the distortion, but then it just holds it and gives me this really solid part that if I then put the bass pre on top, that then's giving me that front end information. We're hitting that pretty hard with the 16T, but with the bass post with that 16 VU on it, it's just holding it where it needs to be. And that really then enables me to kind of change the balance and just being able to kind of put that really nice soft bottom end in, and that gives me that full bass sound. So the 16 VU for me is really great in those jobs where you just want to hold things, but you don't want them to pump, you don't want them to sound too over compressed and too nasty. You just want something that you can really hold in place and get that kind of forwardness of the mix, you know, without losing all your headroom and pushing faders to the top. We can just hold it exactly where I want and then find the level where it needs to sit in the mix. So things like those overheads, things like that, you know, that bass post is great. You know, I've got the articulation, I've got the definition in what they're playing and the note in the pre, but that post with the distortion, I can just really kind of mold it and just bring it in and sit it underneath that pre and just get it to exactly where I want and kind of shape that bass sound. So again, try it on anything you can think of, obviously, but for me, that's two of the areas where I really love the 16 VU. So see what it does for you. We'd love to hear from you and know where you're using it on the console, and enjoy. Cheers.